All right, we're rolling.
Cool.
Cool. Well, thanks again, man, for taking the time. So will you, I think it's probably appropriate if you give a little introduction as far as like what you're doing and how you got to doing it the way you're doing it. It's probably a lot.
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Nate Heller. I live in Dakar, Senegal, and I founded and run a company called PegAfrica that sells solar home systems to people in off-grid villages in Senegal, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire on credit. And a solar home system is a kit that has a solar panel and a battery and enough lights to light up your house, and then some other appliances like a television, radio, flashlight, and a mobile phone charger. And we're a for-profit company, which is something that I'm proud of. And part of the point of us being a for-profit company is that we're trying to prove that you can actually treat these poor people as customers and not just as charity cases who need to have things given to them. And I think that's more empowering and more scalable, and therefore the right way to go when it's possible. And the way that we operate, I said we sell these kits on credit. One of the big challenges that people in villages have is they spend a lot of money on energy over a long period of time, but they very rarely have several $100s to spend at one moment. And that's what it costs to get a solar home system. And even if they do have that much money, they're going to spend it on a cow or a motorcycle or something that they know and trust, rather than something that feels a little newer and riskier than, like a solar kit. So you have to sell it to them on credit. But these people are basically not necessarily the worst. They're not bad payers, but they're the worst credit customers you can think of, because all of the things that a bank would normally use to give somebody credit, they don't have. They don't have any financial history that can be documented. They don't have anything that they own that the bank could take away, really. They don't have a job with a salary. So 85% of our customers have never received a loan before. There are people that microfinance doesn't really touch. So we use technology to be able to give them credit. And the two major elements are, first of all, the kits that we sell have a meter inside them, so that if the person stops paying off their loan, the meter runs down and the device stops working. So that reduces my risk enough that I can trust somebody, as long as they're able to afford to pay, which we gauge by an upfront payment that shows that they can afford to make the monthly payment. This means that they will pay, because they're going to lose all their money because it'll stop working if they quit paying. The second major element is what we call mobile money, which is basically a bank account that's tied to somebody's mobile phone number, which means that instead of us having to go around and collect cash every week or every month from thousands of people, they can pay electronically. They can just pay with their phone, and we get the money, and then they get a text message with a number, and they punch that number into a keypad on their product, and that's what unlocks the device.
It's amazing.
And once they're paying for 3 years, then it's unlocked and they own it.
That's incredible. Just how modernized that technology is in such a that's so, people that don't even have electricity, they're trying to get electricity, but we can pay through a mobile phone. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, it came about probably about 10 years ago in East Africa, and it's really because people don't have bank accounts. But then somebody realized, so mobile phones started to take off, I would say around 2000 in Africa, and they spread really, really fast. They probably spread faster in some ways than they did in the developed countries, because the normal phones are not, same reason why solar is doing well, because people don't have electricity, so they need solar. And same thing, nobody put phone lines out to these villages, so once they got a mobile phone, it was this amazing, oh my God, I can now call people and not have to travel a long distance to be able to speak to them.
Right.
Once you have a mobile phone, the other thing that you automatically have is this electronic identifier. You have this virtual identity that is your phone number. And that means, and you're, to be able to use your mobile phone, the way that it works in Africa, most mobile phone accounts in the US are postpaid. You sign up and you pay a monthly bill. The way it usually works here, you buy scratch cards with a number on it for a certain amount of minutes of mobile phone usage, and you then punch that number into your phone, and then you can use the phone until you run out of those minutes. And so basically people were already using those phones as a store of monetary value. It's just that money could only be used to make phone calls rather than for whatever you wanted. But still, it meant like they were keeping virtual money. You could put $100 and now you have $100 of phone minutes. And so the sort of next logical thing that people thought of was, whoa, could you like buy something where your mobile phone number is storing that money, but you can then take the money out and spend it on other things? Or you can send it to your grandma who lives halfway across the country. You're a person in the city, you want to pay them, you don't know how to get the money to them, you can just do it that way. And it really, the experiment started in Kenya, and nobody really knew if it was going to do well. And there was one mobile phone company that started doing it, and they invested a lot of money in it, and it's called the Safaricom, and the mobile phone service is called M-Pesa, and it just took off like crazy. And the government didn't know it was going to succeed, so the government kind of said, okay, you guys can try this and we won't regulate you, and we'll give you a year or two to test it and see. And it took off so well that it was kind of the genie out of the bottle, and they couldn't even stop it. And in Kenya, you can like go to the store and buy a Coke with mobile money. Everybody has it. Everybody carries a balance on their phone because they can use it for all kinds of things, and it's amazing. In the other countries, it's growing, but it's gone a lot slower. Partly because once it took off so well in Kenya, the banking sectors in the other countries all kind of freaked out that all of these customers were going to stop putting their money in banks and just hold it in mobile money. That hasn't really happened, and I think the customer bases are different. The rich people are going to use banks, the poor people are going to use mobile money. The poor people were not using banks anyway, but it's gone a lot slower because there's been a lot more regulation, and also I think you end up having too many companies trying to do it in each country. But anyway, took off in Kenya, and then people said, hey, what else could we do with this? People are now able to send money electronically. That means that I could set up something like what our company does, where they could make this payment to me electronically, and I could then sell stuff to them on credit without having those costs of going and collecting the cash from them all over the place. And they could instantaneously pay me and get the credit, because they don't want to like pay you and then you have to wait to see whether the money comes to you and then you send them. So yeah, so it became this big thing in Kenya, and then a few years after it got huge there, we were one of the first companies to try to do it in West Africa, where there's way less mobile money. And yeah, now we have about 60,000 customers.
Wow.
In Ghana, and then fewer in Ivory Coast, and just hit 1,000 customers in Senegal.
Wow, that's awesome. So I want to hear more about the specifics of what you do and how that's impacting everybody. But I want, if we can back up and just because you did work for non-government organizations for a long time, and I'm fascinated by your transition to that and how you're running a for-profit business, and it sounds like that's working a lot better to accomplish your goals. And I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, cool. So when I was like 14, I somehow decided that I wanted to join the Peace Corps after college, and I don't remember why that was, but that was my mantra, and I went around telling everybody that that's what I was going to do after college. And so there was not really any other thing I could have possibly done. And I got it posted to Senegal. One reason I'm happy to be back here now. And so when I was 22, I went off to Senegal, and I lived in a little village for 2 years. They didn't speak anything but Wolof, and people are farmers. And we ate millet every day. And it was just me there, which was pretty intense, but really amazing, fun, crazy experience. And from that, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I kind of thought I wanted to be some sort of an international development guy, to continue working in developing countries and trying to in some way contribute to supporting, reduction of inequality is how I really think about it. That it's really crazy that these people who are pretty much the same as everybody I grew up with have so much less, and have many less opportunities. And I wanted my life to be about trying to help with that. And what I knew about at that time as possible approaches were all of the different NGOs, nonprofit organizations doing stuff, and then the government aid programs like USAID, and then the UN and World Bank and that kind of stuff. So I got a job with a nonprofit that was doing sustainable transportation stuff just because they happened to need somebody in Senegal. And I spent a year in Dakar and then a year in Accra, Ghana. And then I went to grad school in Washington, D.C. for international relations and economics, like kind of with a focus on development, with the idea that I was going to go work for USAID or a big NGO or something within that whole sector.
Yeah.
And when I came out of there, I still didn't quite know what specifically I super wanted to do within that. But I got this fellowship with the UN. So I worked for the Food and Agriculture Organization as a Congressional Hunger Fellow for 2 years. I did 1 year in Rome and 1 year in Ghana. And I was doing research on information communication technologies for agriculture and kind of looking at what was going on in Ghana and doing case studies and looking at the government. The government was coming out with a policy on that. So I was studying how they were making the policy. And I basically, and one of the groups that one of the projects I was studying was a business that was trying to share market information with farmers. And the guy was doing it as a for-profit. And then the other things were much more government and like international organization related. And I just got way more excited by how the guy was trying to make things work with the for-profit. And I felt like working in this big organization, I was kind of facilitating things, but not really necessarily doing anything. And I felt like there was a lot of money spent on things that I wasn't sure really were going to make an impact on people like the ones I lived with when I was in the Peace Corps. And I really wanted to feel like I was making a hands-on impact. And I started reading, and I kind of had my like aha moment or my turning point as, what did I really want to do within development at that time? And I got really excited about social enterprise and the idea that with a for-profit business, if you can make it work, that first of all, the people are paying for what you're giving them. It's not some donor who's paying for it. And even if the beneficiaries are not into it, the donor thinks it's a good thing, so they'll keep giving you money and you'll keep doing it even if it's not. There's too much of that. If the for-profit and the customers are paying you, then if they don't like what you're doing, you'll go out of business, as you should. Also, I felt like there's such a grand scale to the challenges that people have that charity money is never going to be enough to help solve these things. And governments often don't have enough money to do things. So if you can make something work as a for-profit, and you can generate a return on capital for investors, that means that if you're doing it well, it can get to any scale you could possibly want it to. And the two major models I saw for that were microfinance and mobile phones, which have really grown, and there's some good and bad about things, but those things have reached a large percentage of the people that need them. Not everybody, but so I got very excited about that, and I thought, well, I've never worked for a for-profit before. I don't know anything about business. I've always been kind of, on the other side of things. So how do I get qualified for that? And sometimes I think I could have just gone into it and learned, but I thought maybe it would be useful to get a business degree. And I found out that Yale had this really good program where they pay back your loans if you do socially beneficial stuff after you graduate. And I thought, wow, okay, I could go get an MBA and not have to pay for it. Or if I decided to do something else, then I would hopefully make enough money that I could pay for it. So I went to business school. And then it took me a couple of years of trying to find the right thing to do and start. I went to India for 6 months and worked for a social enterprise that did eyeglasses for poor people. I worked for a startup that never really started up, that kept changing what it was supposed to do in San Francisco and Brazil. It was fun living in those places. And then I came across this Australian guy who had started a solar company that was selling solar kits through microfinance banks, using those networks as a way to reduce the risk and give credit, and helping the microfinance banks who are only used to selling money to be able to sell actual physical products on credit. And he had a family in the States, but the business was in Ghana, and he needed somebody to kind of be his co-founder who actually lived on the ground. And I had already lived in Ghana for a while, so it was a good fit. So I moved over to Ghana at the start of 2012, and it was just me and him and one Ghanaian guy. And then, yeah, that was the start of the things. It was called Impact Energies. We spent about 2 years trying to make the microfinance model work, and trying to raise money. We never really made it work with the microfinance banks, so that's partly maybe because we didn't have any money. After 2 years, we got investment from a group that wanted us to switch to this model of, we call it pay-as-you-go, of kits that have a meter inside, so you don't have to have a microfinance bank because you can sell it yourself and the meter reduces your risk. And then it took another year before we found the right partner to supply us and teach us how to do things. And then, yeah, start of 2015, things started to grow. And now we're in 3 countries and it's going pretty well.
Yeah. So so it's, you're primarily doing the whole kits, and the solar power and the home solar power. So a lot of these, I'm assuming a lot of these places don't even have, infrastructure for electric lines and that sort of thing, or do they have, or do most of them have that, but it's problems?
They have it, and it's expensive for somebody to connect it to their house. But most of the customers are in places where there's no lines near them. Or maybe they're near a road and there's high tension wires that go by, but there's no transformer that would make it possible for them to hook up to it.
So you just bypass the whole need for all of that by
yeah.
doing kits.
Yeah, and what I hope is, we've gotten to the size, a couple of years ago, you could pretty much just have lights. Now all of our kits have TVs, which people really, really like, and you can debate the usefulness, but I think it's a really useful thing because it brings outside information and, influence and ways the world can be into these villages, which are pretty isolated most of the time. We're now selling kits with fans. Fridges are on the way, and I would say coming pretty soon. And it's kind of, the battery technology keeps evolving and the products keep evolving, and what people can afford with financing keeps getting better and better. And so I kind of think within a couple of years, once you have a fridge, maybe you want a laptop, an AC would be nice, but most of these people wouldn't have that anyway. Like, you get to where somebody has the same things that someone with electricity at their income level would have. And so then you really don't need household electrification, which would be a great thing. You still potentially want to have some something bigger for productive use, like milling machines, things like that. They're still going to have to, but if the grid only had to focus on that, that would be a pretty great thing.
Yeah. No, it's,
yeah.
I mean, that's
I hope it's like the cell phone. Yeah.
Well,
like the cell phone, like bypass, leapfrogging the landline.
Totally. And I mean, I'm curious if there's been, how it's been received, both by the people and by the governments you're working with and the localities. If there's been pushback from the electric companies, or if they're just that's not even an issue over there. I mean, I'm probably just imagining in the States where it's like, there's such an entrenched system here that, people who, are off-grid solar are totally bucking the trend, but this is a completely different ecosystem you're in, where a lot of those.
Yeah. So no, there isn't pushback from the customers. There are, people see it as this new thing. It's very different from in the US where, if you switch to solar, it's because you're into the environment or whatever. You're not really even saving much money at this point unless there's the right tax breaks, in your situation. You're doing it to be cool or to be good for the environment. Here, because you have the grid and the grid works fine. Where we are, you're basically doing it because you don't have the grid and you're spending a whole bunch of money right now on batteries and kerosene, or maybe if you're rich, you have a generator, but you're spending a whole lot of money on the generator. So no, I mean, when people don't get it, it's because maybe they can't afford it, or maybe because, it's kind of a new technology and they don't trust it yet. And there's definitely a lot of like Chinese junk out there, and sometimes that's made some people distrust. In terms of the government, you definitely, so we're now looking into some countries like Burkina Faso and Mali where the electrification rate is like 20%. In East Africa, it's grown a lot, but it was really, really low before. But in those places, I feel like the government is just like, we don't know when we're ever going to get to electrification, so we're really not worrying about this stuff. In Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal, they've got more like a 50-60% electrification rate. And so there is some stuff from the government where they're like, well, we think that we're going to make this happen within the next 20 years or 10 years, or they make plans, but I don't feel like it necessarily is going to happen. But it gets them a little more into like, maybe we're going to try to regulate this. Maybe this could compete with us. But then, yeah, they haven't really done anything around it. In Senegal, they have given concessions to companies in certain regions to do the electrification. It seems like the companies have not been able to make it work financially generally. But there has been a little bit where sometimes those concession companies have tried to go after companies like ours that are selling people solar kits because they say, oh, now this guy is not going to be my customer. But the government generally has favored us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it would make sense that they did, because you're, you used the term leapfrogging before. I mean, you're leapfrogging the need for all kinds of infrastructure and all kinds of, and it just cuts the time frame. And I mean, the individuals you work with gain more autonomy. The communities gain more autonomy. They're not dependent on.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody was able to electrify a place, I can see the argument. That's like, I can electrify it, but it's only going to be worth it to me to electrify it if I'm going to have X number of customers. And therefore, if you reduce that number of customers, then, but I feel like in most of these cases, they're not really able to do it themselves. So it's not really an issue. The other issue we've sometimes run into, so we tried for a little while when we were first starting with the pay-as-you-go to do mini grids, which is a slightly different technology where instead of me selling you, our model is basically like a home appliance. I'm selling you the equivalent of it's a TV, but like a washing machine or a TV or whatever, and you're on credit. And, you're just buying this product from me. And it happens that the product is a solar home system that generates solar power. But I'm not selling you the power. I'm just selling you this electronic device. With mini grids, you set up like a centralized power generation source, and you hook it up to all the houses, and then you're selling people the electricity. And people that do that, so first of all, I don't really like the idea of owning big infrastructure in like hundreds of villages across West Africa, or thousands of villages, because I think there's a lot of challenges there. But also, when you're selling electricity, then the government sometimes comes in and says, well, why are you charging a higher rate per kilowatt hour, than people in the city are paying? Because these people are poorer than the people in the city. And it's not a good argument for two reasons, but it sometimes could screw you up if you were trying to sell electricity. It's not a good argument, first of all, because same thing, like if somebody is riskier, on a loan, you're going to charge them a higher interest rate because you have to follow up on the loan and to cover your costs. Same thing, if it costs me a lot more to generate electricity for you, I have to charge you more than somebody where, it's being supplied to tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people, and it costs me much less because I can do it on a bigger scale. And the second reason is when you think about the electricity that's being generated in the cities, a lot of people have, you remember when we were growing up, like you would have a 40-watt light bulb. Like a normal incandescent bulb, even a slightly dim one, was 40 watts. And so to power that, you're going to use 40 watts in an hour. Our bulbs are 1 watt. It's an LED. If you think about like an incandescent bulb, it was 40 watts or 60 or 100. Then they came out with those CFLs, like those twisty ones, and they were like 10 watts. And now they have LED bulbs, which are like 1 watt. And, everybody's encouraging people to switch over to them. They last a really long time, but it costs you more up front. So therefore, people don't necessarily want to, in the States, it's a thing too. But with a bulb that only uses 1 watt, giving the same amount of light as this other one using 40 watts, the kilowatt hour comparison is pretty irrelevant because I'm still charging you maybe the same amount for the amount of light that you get, even if I'm charging you a lot more per kilowatt hour because you're using a lot less kilowatt hours.
Mm-hmm. That's the grid setup and you were selling electricity?
With the grid, like you just kind of get so much power and it's so cheap. It can still be kind of expensive, but comparatively, it's so cheap that, people don't really worry about using a 40-watt bulb. Or, all the AC appliances just use a hell of a lot more power than our battery-powered ones.
Right. Yeah. Well, that brings up another thing. We touched on it, but just, your ability to the way your model is set up is you're bypassing so much risk that you can work with people that, couldn't get a loan, the bank couldn't touch, but you're not doing it in this altruistic way. You have it set up where it's still accountable. Everybody's still accountable.
Yeah, it's altruistic. Like my purpose is to help these people get access to light and to things that they didn't have access to. I just think that doing it as a for-profit is the best means to that end.
Yeah, and that also I think is fascinating. You talked about that for a minute, but I think it is worth going into that a little because it's very counterintuitive for a lot of people. Maybe not for folks that have worked directly, with that stuff, but it seems very counterintuitive for folks, to think, well, in a sense, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like, in a sense, the solution is it's a capitalistic solution in a sense. Maybe that's the wrong word, and you're welcome to, correct that. But it seems counterintuitive. Although what you said makes a whole lot of sense as far as you are accountable to the people you work with, and if they don't like what you have, you'll go out of business. There's that feedback loop where they can, the people you work with are determining your success or not, and that makes a whole lot.
It's definitely recognizing that we live in a capitalist world, mm-hmm. and that, I think I definitely agree with a lot of the things that more socialist people say. And I think, especially when the government's in, a place like the US, when the governments can't afford it, and when there's enough tax base, they should be taxing people more, and they should be using that money to support people. But I think within the way that things work right now, which is, the only way to get unlimited funding to do something is to prove that you can make a profit off of it. this is a really good way to try to make this happen. And yeah, I don't know. And I do think it's more empowering to the people, and it's more sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just so many wasted development projects littered across Africa where they brought in something that people didn't need, and then there was, or something people did need, but there was no money for follow-up, and the project ends and the thing just rots. That I really like this as a better approach. And we're still trying to prove that it's going to work and grow, but it's going all right for now.
It sounds like it's growing very well organically.
And I mean, the people that invest in us are still pretty much all impact investors, which means, you know, we're having to give them about the same rate of return that a normal investor would, but we're much more risky. It's more like a VC level of risk, you know, but we're not likely to have that massive billion-dollar unicorn payoff that a VC is expecting. Yeah, and so definitely, like, even our investors, their purpose is to try to facilitate, you know, figuring out this model that's going to help people. But I hope we get to where people who only want to make money would still want to invest in something like this.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it sounds brilliant, you know, and I mean, it also sounds like, you know, the modern technology is allowing things to happen that sounds like they maybe couldn't have happened 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty cool, you know.
Yeah, it's to see things build on one another.
Yeah.
You know, first you get the mobile phones, and then somebody's like, oh man, a mobile phone, people are storing money electronically in a way that they never did before. Let's turn that into an actual money account. And then somebody says, well, that's actually working. Let's use that as a way to give people credit in a way that we couldn't before. And it's really cool how it's kind of step by step like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And I love the kind of decentralized nature of the whole system that you guys are doing, but also the systems you're plugging in with. It's cool. And it's a lot of it's new. It's not what's around me. Like, I don't know any of this stuff. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, you know, as far as, like, can you kind of paint a picture a little bit as far as, like, how your work's actually impacting folks in, you know, some of these really rural areas?
Yeah, I mean, you know, so imagine you have a farmer in rural village in Senegal. Let's call him Babacar. That's a common name. He probably has 1 to 2 wives, maybe 5 or 6 kids. And right now he has battery powered lamps, or maybe he even still has kerosene lamps. And when you have one of those lights, first of all, it's really dim. I need to plug in my computer or it will die. It's really dim. Like, when I was in Peace Corps, I had a kerosene lamp in my hut, and it's bright enough that you can kind of see your way to go around, but it's not bright enough that you can possibly read or study. When I needed when I was trying to read a book, I would have to have the kerosene lamp, and then I would have a flashlight that I would point at the book. And it's not really bright enough that you can cook by it. So if your kid is trying to study, he's got the flashlight, and maybe only have one flashlight, and then the mom needs to cook dinner, so she takes away the flashlight to cook, and the kid can't study anymore. And then you have a radio, which is your main way of connecting to the world, and you have to buy batteries constantly for that. Then you need to go around. Your bathroom is kind of out in the field, so at night, whether you're doing something else or you're going to the bathroom, you have to have a flashlight that you use to go out there. You're always spending money on batteries for the flashlight. And you have a mobile phone. For a lot of people, the only way you have to charge your mobile phone is going into town, which might be a couple hours away. And so maybe you only go into town when there's market day once a week. And so you only charge your phone once a week. So you keep it switched off. And then once in a while, when you want to connect with somebody, you switch it on. And so these things are very inconvenient and end up costing you quite a lot of money.
Yeah, the batteries add up quick.
Yeah, and maybe you've come across solar kits that can do a lot of, and you don't have a TV because you don't have any way to power a TV unless you're really rich and you have a generator. People have come across a lot of solar kits, and some of them they could afford cash, but they're usually these crappy Chinese ones that'll probably break within 6 months, and they don't have financing and they don't have a warranty, and it's just some kind of fly-by-night thing. And so, yeah, what we're offering them, they pay something like $50 up front, which is not insubstantial, but it's something that they can get together. And then they pay about $25 a month for 3 years, and they're mostly able to handle that. And they get 5 bright lights, a TV, a radio, I said a torch, and a phone charger. So then they can charge their phone every day in the comfort of their own home. They have bright enough light that they can cook and study and do everything they want at the same time. They usually put one outside the home to scare away animals or anything like that. They leave that on all night. They have this flashlight that's rechargeable by the solar battery, so they never have to buy batteries for their flashlight again, and it's way brighter than a lot of the ones they had on the market. And they have a radio and a TV that are also solar rechargeable. So they suddenly have kind of everything they need for their energy needs, or at least for what they were doing previously with energy plus a TV. And once they've finished paying it off, it'll last for another couple of years without them having to pay anything. So they save hundreds of dollars over the lifetime of the system.
Yeah.
They've never had a loan before, so we're helping to establish a credit record for them. We haven't done very much with trying to use that data to get them other loans, but suddenly, after they've paid off our loan, we've got 3 years of data on how they pay loans, which means we've suddenly established an actual electronic record of whether they're a good loan customer or not. They've also really never had a warranty before. That's something that's kind of nice. We have a call center that operates 7 days a week. So if they have a problem, they can call us up and we can fix the issues. So it really is also kind of trying to bring them into the system and a bunch of sort of ways that the world works for people in cities that it doesn't work that way for them.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Is that
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's pretty clear. Yeah. Flashlights for batteries and a kerosene lamp. That's a lot to maintain. Were people having problems? I've heard that folks were having problems with a lot of kerosene use can cause problems. Is that something that a lot of these folks have dealt with, or it's more just the dim light?
Yeah. Well, no, yeah. Also, I mean, kerosene lamps, they create smoke. They're not very healthy to have. A lot of the smoke comes from cooking, but yeah, kerosene is really not a great thing. And then you can knock it over and burn down your hut. That was an issue back in the day. It's definitely changed quite a bit, I would say, since I was in Peace Corps. Where the governments in lots of countries have reduced subsidies on kerosene, and as LED lamps have become something more available, there are battery-powered lamps that people have access to that are pretty good. And so I have seen that kerosene has gone down quite a lot. So that used to be something we would always talk about as one of the major benefits. We're getting rid of kerosene. I sometimes think they've already kind of gotten around there, but batteries are still really expensive.
Yeah.
And things are not bright enough.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. No, I just think it's just really interesting to hear about how, I mean, just so many things. It seems like it's growing, you know, into now that, I mean, you're bringing the whole the power source, you know, once that's available, like now so many other things are available to folks, and just I mean, it sounds like this is just well, it just makes a lot of sense, everything you're talking about, and it's really cool to hear how it like sidesteps a lot of issues and potential issues and past issues and issues that would be in other places that maybe had more infrastructure and had everything kind of locked into a grid. You know, that you're able to do something that actually makes a whole lot more sense without, you know, having to kind of buck the system as it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully it sort of means that, just like with cell phones, you know, this thing grows faster than the grid does. And in the countries that are really unelectrified and have massive populations, like Congo, for example, maybe this gets to where that's just the way these people light their homes. And
yeah,
the government doesn't have to worry about spending money on that because they got too many other things to spend money on.
Yeah, well, it sounds like ultimately it's less. It's
in a more environmental way.
Yeah, it's more environmental, and I mean, I'd be surprised if this didn't end up being cheaper the way you're doing it than the traditional ways.
Yeah, well, especially in places with low population density.
Yeah, to not have to put lines all the way from the power plants and all that jazz.
Yeah, and hopefully it also can discourage urbanization, because one of the big challenges is people are in these villages and they're perfectly somewhat happy in the village, but there's not enough jobs, there's not enough opportunities, partly because there's no infrastructure. And so then they go to the cities and they wind up having kind of a much worse life scrabbling by in the city because there were no opportunities in the village. And the cities are getting way overcrowded. And if you can find ways to improve the opportunities in the village, then maybe people will stay there and can kind of stem that. Maybe you even, if you really do it well, can stem all the immigration challenges that we have. You know, because people are not like going to Europe for fun. They're going because there's no jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense what you're talking about. Awesome. Anything else you want to tell us?
I don't know. It's really fun being part of a sector that is very new and is growing really fast.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think has been really cool is, like, I feel like over the past 7 years since I moved to Ghana, and over the past 5 years I've been doing kind of this stuff, like seeing the different companies evolve and seeing this ecosystem grow, where when we started there were just a few companies that all had to design their own product because there was nobody to buy a product like this from. And then we were one of the first companies to kind of come in with some capital and say, we want to buy somebody else's product. And one of the big companies was called Mcopa, said, yeah, we want to do an experiment where we sell to other people instead of just selling ourselves. And we made this partnership with them, and they taught us a lot. And that really got us growing like we have. And then other of the big companies said, hey, you know, we'd like to kind of start supplying other people. And then these little companies have started popping up in random countries that are buying products from, from those companies. And there's now starting to be this ecosystem of companies that just do distribution like we do. And I think gradually it'll separate into the companies that make the products and the companies that do the distribution, and maybe the companies that build the web backends that kind of manage the products, which is a whole other thing you need. Or maybe there will be consolidation, and like, you know, telcos or energy companies or banks will buy companies like ours because that they want to kind of roll what we're doing into their bigger offering. Mm-hmm. And I believe that it's on this path towards being much more available, everywhere. But it's really interesting watching how is that going to happen, but I'm not quite sure. Yeah, that's pretty
cool. Ooh, sound like.
And we're employing like 1,000 people, which I'm also really proud of.
You're employing 1,000 people? that what you
We're
said?
employing about 500 on salary and about 500 commission-based sales reps across
That's
the three
awesome.
countries.
That's huge.
And that's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's still a drop in the bucket, but yeah, it's nice.
999 more than I'm employing. You know, I struggle with the one. It would just keep me.
But it's crazy because, like, yeah, I came over in 2012 and there were just like 3 of us. And then after we got investment, we had about 20 people. When we started growing, it started 2015, and it's gone really, really fast.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's really awesome. And I mean, that alone is, I mean, shoot, people need jobs, man. I mean, just providing jobs is a good thing, but especially when it's doing something, you know, you believe in and it's going to, you know, has all these other great benefits. That's really cool, man. It's really cool.
It's fun.
You're going to be heading out into the bush for a couple weeks. Is that what I gathered? Or?
I'm going to the field on Tuesday for a meeting of all the Senegal sales guys. And then, no, actually, I'm coming to the States. My business school reunion is next weekend. But it's the same freaking weekend as the Sidwell 25th reunion. So I'm going to miss the Sidwell one, which I'm kind of bummed about.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just coming home for a week.
Right on. Right on. Well, awesome. Do you want to give out any contact info or business website or anything like that for folks? Or
yeah, sure. Our website is PegAfrica.com. www.PEGAFRICA, PegAfrica.com. My email is nheller, NHELLER @PegAfrica.com. And yeah, feel free to get in touch. And we're always looking for good people. Are just happy to chat.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Nate.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Cool.
Trying to figure out how to, there we go.